Hello and welcome back. This is the second video for A2 Economics for F583 for the leisure side of the course. With the first video we talked about section 1. We talked about the short, this topic, the backward sloping labour supply curve. And we mentioned about the income effect, the substitution effect, being increase in hours worked with increased pay at lower wage rates, and the opposite of that for the income effect, which obviously occurs at higher wage rates where people work less because the standard of living is met. And we also mentioned about the end-firm market concentration ratio. So I'm assuming you're familiar with all that. If you're not, do go back and check that video of leisure. The section 1. This is section 2 we're starting, so this is the main part of it. This is the first part of the rest of your life. I'm joking, you get the idea. So anyway, short run costs. Now if you watched my F582 videos, we did mention what short run was. But we're going to take it a little bit more sort of into the leisure context even. Because we did say the short run was affected sort of immediately in the future for the first 3 years, and then obviously something we'll go into next video. The long run is after 3 years, but again, as I said, we're focusing on the short run today. Okay, so in the short run, what happens? Well, if you remember from F581, again going back to our F581 knowledge, you should know there are 4 factors of production. Which of this pen isn't one? Because it's not working. We have land. God's sake, this pen isn't working either. I just used all these pens too much. Land, labour, capital, and enterprise. So in the short run, one of these is always fixed, and generally we don't really talk about enterprise. It's either land or capital, and the reason it's not labour is because labour is what we call a variable factor. So a variable equals labour. And that is because in the short run you can quickly ask a worker within a day, say, could you work a few hours extra today and we'll pay you a bit more. Obviously that leads into overtime pay, which could be double pay, etc. But the idea is that labour is a variable factor, so it could increase that. Now this leads me nicely onto something that we need to know. Which is something called the Law of Diminishing Returns. Now this is quite a key, sort of tricky concept to get your head around, but if you can think of it in the way I like to, it should be fairly self-explanatory. What I'm going to tell you now is I'm going to tell you directly out of my economics book, and it's word for word the proper definition, but what I'm going to say is I'm going to write the proper definition out, and then I'm going to tell you how I interpret that definition. I think both ways are acceptable, but if you want to be safe with yourself, put the proper definition. But as I said, I'm going to teach you my way so you can understand it and then be able to use that to understand the proper definition. So I'll go through the proper definition first. Doesn't matter if you don't understand it, I will go through my way, as I said, so you don't need to worry about that. So the Law of Diminishing Returns says in the booklet I've got. Let's get the booklet out first. That's right, I don't know it, I do know it, let's get it word for word out here. So if it goes wrong, it's not my fault. Okay, so, find this damn page. Sorry, just be a second. Okay, the Law of Diminishing Marginal Returns, that should be marginal by the way, that's my first mistake. Law of Marginal Diminishing Returns, but Law of Diminishing Returns is fine. Says, as we add more units of labour, so this could be more workers or more overtime, as we add more units of labour to a fixed amount of capital and land to a fixed amount of capital and land. So as we add more units of labour to a fixed amount of capital and land. The change in total output will first rise, then fall. So the change in total output will first rise, total output will first rise, then fall. So it'll still be increasing the output, so what it's essentially saying, but it'll be increasing by a slower amount. And the change in total output will first rise, then fall. So if you didn't get that, so as we add more units of labour to a fixed amount of capital and land, the change in total output will first rise, then fall. Now if you didn't get that, how I prefer to think of it is, sorry, set my work down. Basically, this only applies in short run, by the way, this is why we're talking about it now. So what it essentially is saying is, if you've done business studies, it will help. Basically, we have productivity of workers. Now, if you add one worker, he will add 10 units, and if you add another worker, he'll add you 12. So it'll become 22 units for 2 workers, and it'll be slowly increasing. So the productivity of each added worker will generate you an extra bit. So the marginal productivity. So each work you add will add a bit more productivity per worker to your workforce, or to your labour force. Oh, that's the wrong word. To your labour supply. However, once you start to use up your resources, so say we've got a farming place here, so say we've got 4 farm machines, all square blocks, because that's how farm machines are in my mind, and you say, okay, we've got one worker here, so we've got one person here, and he has to sow all, lay all the potatoes, cultivate the land, and make it all ready for farming. So he has to not only operate these 4 machines by himself, he has to also cultivate the land, put in the potatoes, and put in the seeds for the potatoes or whatever, which are, sound thick there, and put pesticides down, make sure the slugs, and basically he has to do all these, operate these 4 machines and do everything else besides. But if we had another worker, say one worker, he could produce 10 units. So I'll just put here, I'll rub this out, worker, output. So it's the number of workers and the total output. So for one worker, you could get 10 potatoes. For 2 workers, you could get 22 potatoes. For 3 workers, you could get 33 potatoes. Oh no, you get 34 potatoes, sorry. For 4 workers, so this is at maximum output really, sort of not maximum output, but all the machines being used, all the capital is being used, we could have 46, so at 3 workers it could be 36, sorry, and then 48 at 4 workers, this is, my head's going, so 1 worker could have 10 units, 2 workers could have 22 units, 3 workers could have 36 units, 4 workers could produce 49 units. Now it's like, 4 workers could produce 52 units. I don't know where I'm getting these figures from. Basically, there's an increase by 12, and then an increase by 14, and then an increase by 16. So it's going up the same time. It's going up so it's increasing each time. However, if we add a 5th worker to this mix, he's still adding he's still helping out, but he can't be as efficient because he doesn't have a whole new bit of capital. And as we said, there's always one fixed factor of production in the short run, so he can't really just produce a machine. So we'll say the increase is actually to 60. So it's still an increase of 8, but it's half of the increase of adding a 4th worker. So, and that will continue to decrease until actually the workers started to reduce the total output as they get in each other's way. And the original 4 workers can't be as productive as they were because they're trying to navigate around the humans, or the idiots as I like to call them, because humans are idiots. I prefer animals, though some people are animals, but that's just a thing. So anyway, back to economics. So how does this relate to our law of diminishing returns? Well, what it actually says, this says the change in output will increase, which is what we've shown here, which we've shown with each worker until it's until we until we've filled all of the land and capital, it's still increasing by an increasing amount. But as we use up all the capital, as we've used it all up, we still have more labour. It's still going to increase the total output, but it won't be increasing by as big amount. And then slowly, as we add even more labour, we'll actually start to end up producing that. And then the firms need to know this because they need to know the amount of people they need to employ for a given job. So hopefully that's been some kind of help of understanding this law of diminishing returns. So I'll just give you a minute to copy that down, and once you've copied that down, we'll crack on with the next bit of the course. Alright, so hopefully you've got that down. I'll just rub this out. Okay, so I'll leave the law of diminishing returns on there. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to talk about, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about these types of costs, because if you've done AQAS business studies, you will understand these. And I've already done a video. If you don't understand these terms I'm going to talk about, you can just flick onto our AQAS business videos. I know it's business and AS, not A2, and it's business, not economics, but theory still apply. So again, check out that video if you don't understand some of the terms that I'm going to come across here. Now the only things that aren't on that video are the average fixed costs, the average total cost and the average variable cost, and something called the marginal cost. Apart from that, these next few are on that video. So the first one, fixed costs. Now fixed costs don't change with respect to output. As the name suggests, they are fixed. So you could produce 1,000 units and it'd still be 100 grand if say the fixed cost was 100 grand, and you produce 1,000 units, it's still going to be 100 grand. If you produce 0 units, it's going to be 100 grand. The fixed costs, they don't care, they don't change. An example of a fixed cost could be salaries of your managers. So you get 40 grand a year. If they produce 7,000 units in 1 year, they'll still get paid 40 grand. If they produce 0 units in another year, I mean, they'll probably get fired, but still they wouldn't change their pay. You could argue that fixed costs change in the long run, which should be true, but again we're only talking about the short run here. So for what we're concerned with, they don't change immediately with respect to output. Variable costs, on the other hand, are different. They do increase with output. They are proportional to an increase in output. So what we mean, examples of these could be insurance. If you're ramping up your production, you're having more vans, you're having more materials, which is another variable cost. You've got to insure a bigger premises. So obviously, it's going to cost you more, so hence it's a variable cost. You could include that with security or wages, which are the difference in wages and salaries. A wage is you get paid £8 per hour. A salary, you get paid 40 grand a year. They're two different things. So remember, keep your eye on that. Your average variable cost, there's a couple of things here. Average variable cost is your total variable cost over quantity sold. That's the same for fixed cost, you just change variable to fixed. So average fixed cost, as the name suggests, is the fixed cost per unit. So total fixed cost over output, and that gets you your fixed cost per unit. Your total cost, so you get average total cost, which is the accumulation you would have guessed, because total cost equals fixed cost plus variable costs. Again, if you don't get that, watch our AS business video. And you could do that by adding your average variable cost and average fixed cost, or you could just simply divide your total cost by number of output, or units sold, sorry. So they are the 3 things you should know from AS business studies. 1 or 2 things that you might not know. So your marginal cost, basically, I'll put that up there because that's quite a new term, even if you've done business studies. So your marginal cost is the change in total cost over the change in output. Right, I know, output. So that's your marginal cost, and basically what that says is how much does it cost you to produce the next unit, because it's marginal to the next unit. Essentially, the marginal cost is the next cost that you're going to incur if you produce 1 more unit. It's essentially what it's saying. You can work that out just by saying the formula, essentially. So why have they left this big space at the bottom? Well, there's a diagram you need to know. Now, one thing I must stress at this point, you will never be able, well, there's only ever been one time where it's asked you to draw this diagram, and it's not asked you to draw it directly, as we're going to draw it now. But don't ignore this diagram, this is quite key, because what we're going to go on to after this, after the short run cost, after we've done long run costs, we're going to be looking at markets and oh, sorry. Yeah, you will need to know this diagram. Sorry, I was thinking about the long run. So ignore what I've just said there. Basically, you will need to know this diagram, but I think my statement still stands if you've never really been asked on specifically to draw this. Okay, so we'll start with your average fixed costs. Now, it looks something like this, and what I'm going to draw is I'm going to draw each of the curves, so it sort of goes down like that. I'll sort of make it a bit smaller. And this is your average fixed costs. So remember, we don't change with output, but we'll go more into that in a minute. And then your average variable costs looks something like this. It starts at the bottom, cuts through sort of there, and it goes there. The average variable cost. Now, your average total cost is the combination of these two. So if you add these two curves together, it's going to look something like this. And remember, you need to put it above your average fixed costs. So it's going to look something like that. That's your average total cost. And then your marginal cost is going to look something like this. Cut through the bottom of your two curves, so your average variable costs. Make sure it's a bit more accurate than I've done it. It's going to cut through your bottom of your average variable cost and your average total cost. Okay, so that's what the curves look like, something like that. This is your marginal cost. That's your average total cost. That's your average variable cost, the average fixed cost. And the x-axis, we've got the number of units. And on the y-axis, we've just got costs. Alright, I like to put these in pounds, but if you don't have to. Number of units, and you just put units there. Okay, so how did I just randomly decide to draw them lines like that? Well, I'll explain them. It's not the best looking diagram, it's not the neatest, and that's because my pen's kind of running out. Probably having the will to live with all these videos. I don't blame it, to be honest. Okay, so I'll zoom in a little bit there for you. Now, I'll start with the easiest one, which is the average fixed costs. Now, this average fixed cost sort of goes down as it levels out a bit on the bottom here, and that's because, as we said, the average fixed cost doesn't change. The fixed costs don't change with respect to output. So you could produce 1,000 units and it'd still be the same fixed costs. But the difference is, we're spreading them, so the more units you produce, as we know, average fixed cost equals fixed costs over units sold. So the more units you sell, the lower your average fixed cost is going to be. So as we move along the x-axis in terms of the number of units, the average fixed cost is going to go down, and that's why it sort of slopes down, and the effect is sort of not as great when you get into the really high units of output. That's why it's not a constant horizontal diagonal line even. Your average variable costs is initially falling because of something we looked at in, again, business studies, something called the division of labour. Basically, that's where the task is split up, so I'll just give you a quick insight if you don't know. Division of labour, basically, if you've got a pin, you've got the head and you've got the little pointy bit at the end, and they're 2 units. Or a pen, for example, someone making the lid, someone making the actual ink, the ink that goes in it, putting it in there, and then you've got the nib bit, and all of them bits are you produce more units with the same workers, but you're just laying up a task. So that's why that falls initially, because you're giving a task to more people. However, initially it does finally increase because of the law of diminishing returns, which say people are getting in each other's way, and that's the average variable costs. The average total cost is a accumulation of these two, the average variable cost and the average fixed cost. So they both initially go falling, so that's why the initial average total cost falls. But as we get past this point, the average variable cost increase is bigger, the gradient is bigger here than it is here. So this average variable cost increase offsets the decrease of the average fixed cost. So that means the average total cost, which is obviously the accumulation of these two, therefore increases, because it's still decreasing here, the average fixed cost is still decreasing, but obviously this is increased by a larger amount because the productivity of each added worker is falling. So that's why that ends up actually increasing. Now the marginal cost is the change in total cost of the change in output. Now we could say that is directly because of the law of diminishing returns. And that's why it cut through the bottom of the average total cost there. Obviously, changing total cost is the change in these over the change in output, so you just sort of related to that if you wanted. But basically, this is just due to the law of diminishing returns, and that's all this marginal cost curve is. So hopefully that's been quite self-explanatory, and you can see why they didn't mention that in business, because you do need to know your economics terms for that. Okay, so hopefully that's been kind of helpful. I don't think there's nothing more to the short run. In the next video, for the long run, what we're going to be talking about is we are going to be mentioning what the long run is, and then we're going to be talking a little bit about the long run average cost curve, which is an accumulation of a couple of the average total cost curves. We're going to be talking about something called the MES, which I'll go into in a bit more detail in the next one. Video, I'm going to be talking about something called the Q star, which is the optimum output level, returns of scale, economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, and we're going to be talking about what factors of reduction are and aren't fixed. So again, that was an insight to the next video. So if it sounds like something you'd like to enjoy, just nip over to the next video. As a summary for this video, we said that in the short run, obviously it's between 0 and 3 years. There's one factor of production that's fixed, generally land or capital. Labour is a variable factor because you can ask people to work overtime. We talked about law of diminishing returns, so basically saying the productivity of each worker initially increases, but then decreases get the other's way. So therefore, because of this, the total output increases at first, they change in it, and then it does fall. That's the change in total output, and then after we get past a certain point, the actual total output falls as well, because we actually make up the workers less productive than they were before by getting in the way. So that means obviously the curve will decrease. And then we went on to talk about the short run cost curves. We talked about the average total cost, the average fixed cost, the average variable cost, and then we talked about the marginal cost. We said that the average fixed cost was fixed costs never change, and if you produce more units, that same cost is spread out over a greater quantity of units produced or sold, whatever you want to call it. But obviously the effect is reduced because initially it's quite great at first, but then you can sort of divide itself off. The average variable cost initially falls because of the division of labour, which we talked about, splitting up tasks, and then increases because of the law of diminishing returns, which say they get in each other's way. The average total cost curve initially falls. It's accumulation of the average variable and average fixed, and then increases because the average variable cost increase offsets a decrease in the average fixed costs, and because the ATC curve, the average total cost curve, is accumulation of the average variable cost curve and the average fixed cost curve. So therefore, obviously that increases. The marginal cost curve, we said because marginal cost is the change in total cost over the change in output, the total cost increase because the average total cost curve increases after a given point, which is shown by the average variable cost curve offsetting the average fixed cost curve increase. So that means that increases beyond that point. Essentially, if that was too much on the marginal cost curve, you just need to know it's because of the law of diminishing returns, because that's what causes the average variable cost to increase. So it's going to cause the marginal cost to increase as well, because essentially that's what it's saying. So hopefully, again, that's been sort of an overview of this video and a bit of an insight to the next one as well. So hopefully that's been helpful, and we'll see you in the next video.